Good morning. Are we all awake now, children? Yeah. Okay. Hey, it's your main man, Dolinus Smallinus. Chapow. Okay. So, here, of course, to talk about Higurashi no Nakakoro ni Go Gao. Go Get 'em Gao. Episode 3. And this is where, 3 episodes in, we're in a 3-episode rule, and this is where I start being difficult. Okay. Just rip the Band-Aid out. Well, first I'll say, I am all in on this. I'm pumped. I'm excited overall. But this is the moment where I guess the hype has, I wouldn't say died down, but it has leveled out. Because this episode, for those of you who watch, was very similar to the original. And getting to that point made me realize a couple of things that I had been kind of, in the back of my head. I think I even mentioned them a few times, especially episode 1 where we were mentioning remake, but it's brought them to the forefront. And that is that while I'm super pumped and all on board for this whole remake sequel thing, the way they're doing it does leave themselves open to one major weakness. And that is that they've turned it from... I'll just say, because they've done what they've done, I'm not just satisfied with the remake anymore. And this episode was mostly remake stuff. And I'll go over some of the differences. But what I'm worried about, there's 2 things. One, since they've announced it's a sequel, I'm not expecting a sequel anymore. And so when they have episodes that are mainly just just remake stuff going over, okay, here's everyone getting up to speed, it feels like a recap episode more than like, an episode of a new show. And so there were a few key differences in this, but that's the other problem, is that I realized that the expectations the show has put on me is that I'm now playing Where's Waldo with Higurashi. I'm not watching it and be like, oh, this is interesting and how they've compared this to that. I'm like, okay, what's different? What's different? Going down the list in my head. Okay, this is different. This part's different. This is different. What does that mean? And that kind of stuff, which is exciting. But what it means is when things aren't especially different or noticeable, it does feel a bit fillery. The closest thing I can think of to compare, memory-wise, would be, which is another great show, I know, just hear me out, is Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, which is fantastic. But you know how the first third of that show is kind of trying to recap the first half of the original show, and so they squeeze a lot of stuff that was a lot more fleshed out and given time to breathe and things like that. And so it felt kind of recappy, and the first third of that show is a little bit weak if you really view it on its own. I worry a bit that I'm going to say Go. I'm going to be wrong. But Go, I'm worried that it's falling prey to that same thing. And I hope, honestly, if this show ends up as good as Brotherhood, I will be, no, not knocking Brotherhood, but that is one of the weakest aspects of a still very good show. And I'm worried that this is the same weakness it could fall into. Because, when there's nothing new, or there's very little new, it just feels a little recappy, and not just because it's covering the same events, but they feel condensed. There's a couple things. So in the original show, this section, about the same point where we are in the original show, Keiichi is full on paranoid. A lot of the differences have made him less paranoid, which is good. I like that that's a different direction, but what it means is that I feel like the thing that strung you along in the original show was the mystery and the paranoia. And since it's a remake, we all know the mystery, and they're intentionally downplaying Keiichi's paranoia. I think mostly to indicate that he is not hallucinating or infected at this juncture. I could be wrong, because again, we showed that supposed flash forward of him scratching his neck, But they've also shown that it could have been a flashback. And Reina, so the biggest changes in this one were, 1, we haven't mentioned Satoshi at all, which was a big point of Keiichi being paranoid. 2, we haven't talked to Takano, which was another thing. A lot of the things that pushed Keiichi to get more paranoid and more suspicious of his friends have been skipped over, which is good. I like that that's different, but ironically, it leads to an episode that felt a little info dumpy, because we're still getting the same information. We need to be at the same point, but without Keiichi's paranoia and the fear mounting, it feels a little bit lower stakes, even though we know there's other things going on in the background. But this whole episode is basically just Oishi just info dumping on Keiichi, and that was the whole episode. And then there are a few differences, like I mentioned, those two. And then I guess another big difference is that instead of it being the one missing and the one dead, they're both missing. So that's definitely, it's a difference. But like I said, I feel like I'm playing Where's Waldo, and when there's very few differences, I'm just. And I was watching some of the things, the comparisons, and I will say this first off, something I've meant to mention in the last episode, but I didn't. The animation has definitely, especially with that dance with Rika and a few other things, has definitely an improvement overall. While I do think some of the facially reactions were better in the Dean, I know that's so weird, but you know what I'm talking about. Those Dean faces were terrifying. But because we're focusing less on paranoia anyway, that's fine. We haven't got as much of the like horrified faces, which is okay. I hope they come back eventually because they're very iconic to the series and they're part of what really convey the horror and emotion or what get you to empathize with these characters. But it's not what they're going for right now, and that's fine. But it does lead. It feels this FL episode is the first one. It felt so squished. It felt like it's just the first episode to me felt like very similar, but they're focusing on different things, and that was fine. And the second one was like a bunch of new stuff, and I was like, whoa, And then this one felt like, okay, we're covering the same material, but we're trying to squish it because we're trying to fit in new stuff. So let's just get the stuff out of the way, remind you all, and then go. And it was a little bit, I don't want to say disappointing, but it wasn't as hype as some of the other episodes, I feel like, because we're still building the tension. I'm sure it will pay off. I have faith. At this point, they've got me. I'm sold. I have faith. But I do want to talk about the fact that this episode was weaker than the other ones, in my opinion. It was a little bit, because it set up your expectations to be looking for all these differences, and then when there's an episode without a lot of differences, it kind of hurts. And then what you're left is with what felt like a squished or abridged version with a lot of the tension sucked out of it. Like, again, in this episode, there's a scene where Oishi talks to Keiichi, and then Keiichi goes home for like 10 seconds, and then immediately he talks to Oishi again. And I get it, because in the original, there was actually more room to breathe between those scenes. And so it felt like, okay, I'm going back like, oh, he's showing back up. In this one, it's like, there were like 10 seconds between those two long conversations with Oishi. And I'm like, why didn't... Why didn't you just make those one scene? And I know the answer is because in the original, which we have to, those were two different scenes. But it feels weird. It feels chained to the original a little bit, which I get because it is half a remake. But I'm worried now because now, instead of being excited for a remake, I'm excited for a sequel. And it feels like the remakey bits are almost getting in the way because the expectations are different now. And I don't necessarily feel like they're handling the remakey sections better, which I get why. Because it's like, okay, here's the information you need to know. We're catching people up. Here's the recap. Okay, new stuff, go. And I get that. But it just doesn't feel like if I'm wanting to get the original, and I know this isn't, but the original Watanagashi story, the Arc 1 story, which this isn't, but is really heavily pulling from. It's like you need to know Watanagashi to understand this, and so it catches you up. Even though there's some things that this definitely does better, the animation was a lot better, in certain points, just stuff like that. But in purely terms of being Watanagashi, I like the Dean one better because this isn't Watanagashi, but it does feel like there's so much recap that it's hurting the new stuff. But then we also want to keep I don't know. It's just this weird place. I hope you understand what I'm talking about. And to be clear, I'm still entirely pumped. 5 out of 5 for me right now. I know we're only 3 episodes in, but I'm entirely excited. But it does reveal some of the issues because it's like, is this just a thing where we're trying to get everyone up to speed and then it's going to be mostly new stuff, or is it going to be half and half, or is it going to be 75 old stuff and 25 new? Like, I'm hoping at least half and half new stuff because they've got me excited for a sequel now is the problem. It's not that what they're doing is bad in and of itself, but it's that they have set clear expectations. They have set very intense expectations. And if this is mostly a remake with a couple new scenes thrown in, that is not the expectations they put in, and it's going to be disappointing if there's not a lot of new stuff, if there's just a little new thing once in a while. if it's mostly remake. I'm hoping it diverges at this point, because in trying to cram a story and a half into even less time, it's the same thing I said at the beginning, where I said, hey, they have less episodes. But if you're trying to cram the full Higurashi story basically in full and a new, smaller story into even less time, everything's going to suffer for it. And I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're going to split. I think once this arc ends, there's going to be elements of the originals, but it's going to be mostly new stuff. But I do think that you run the risk of having to have these little recappy episodes that aren't that different, that are just, okay, the people that didn't watch the original, here's the stuff you need to know to get you up to speed. Whereas it might have been better if they assumed that you had watched it. In trying to make it beginner friendly, is it going to harm the quality of the new stuff, or even worse, harm the quality of the original? Because people should go watch the original anime. It's good, and a lot of the tension's just sucked out of it. It just feels like a shorter recap version. So anyway, overall, I'm very pumped. I'm excited about the differences. I'm excited to see why they're both missing instead of dead and missing. Why Reina is acting so weird, even though Keiichi seems not to be hallucinating. She's acting weird when he's not noticing, which does indicate that it's not a subjective, the viewer, because a lot of times, she's crazy, but it's the viewer, it's whenever you're with Keiichi, and it's his subjective view that makes you think she's going crazy, but she's acting crazy when Keiichi isn't noticing, which indicates she's actually lost it. Oh, and then there's another thing. The glowing eyes on Reina. That's an interesting one, because I said, okay, that's a new effect to make her look creepy, because they had the cat eye originally. But my wife is like, well, her eyes are glowing like Rika's are. Doesn't that mean she's possessed by something evil too? Or, not the Hanizu, but she's if Rika has spiritual power with this good spiritual force, does that mean Reina has been possessed by something evil? Maybe. I've seen a lot of people throw that around. I took it as just an artistic interpretation of the creepy eyes. Woo! But I don't know. Maybe it felt a little too understated to look like the spiritual force power. Because the spiritual powers always had like a very specific look. It's like this reddish purple hue that doesn't really move. It's just kind of like a solid glow. Whereas hers were all swimming. And I remember they kind of described her eyes as being like swimming and crazy when in the visual novel. So like, I don't know. What do you guys think, though? I genuinely want to know, because there's a lot of theories going on. What do the differences mean? I do agree with a lot of people saying that this isn't Takano. She is not killing Rika, or if she is, but she's not the one who started the reboot again, basically, or starting the loop. There's another spiritual force at play, probably tied into Yumeneko, which, by the way, I've caved. I'm not even going to finish Higurashi visual novel because I'm worried. I know the story of Higurashi mostly, and I know the differences, at least, between the visual novel and the, I've Googled them. But Yumeneko seems like it very well may play a big part of the series, and I don't want to be spoiled too much, so I'm trying to get through Yumeneko now. I'm never going to make it. It's like 80 hours, and I have no free time, but I've started it. I'm enjoying the first, 30 minutes that I've been able to get through it. Only 79 hours and 34 minutes to go. Anyway, I know this is a shorter one, but I feel like I've covered a lot of the broad points. There's not a lot to say about this episode. Just info dump. We're getting ready to go into something exciting. I hope it's different. I hope there's more different than the same. What do you guys think? Do you hope it's more remake with a couple new scenes? Or are you hoping for more of a sequel with some obligatory recap put in where needed? I'm definitely leaning towards new stuff. But yeah, please let me know genuinely. I'm on the Higurashi Reddit. Tell me where other people are talking. I want to talk about this. This is one of the few times in my life I'm actually up to date. I always watch something 2 years later and get into the fandom super late. I am in the fandom. I am in the conversation. So hit me up with where people are talking. I want to be able to discuss. If you want to discuss, I know I'm the smallest YouTube channel ever, but we could get on and have some discussion, stuff like that. Whatever. Just anyone who wants to talk with me about this, I'm actually excited. I'm excited to be part of the fandom, be up to date. Hurrah! I know I'm a nobody in this community, but I still love it a lot. So if you want to talk with me, let me know. Send me messages. I like discussing this stuff. My name's Dolan Malna. God bless.